Hello, my name is Selena. I'm 22 years old, and this is my story. I never imagined that marriage would feel like a prison. When I married Jerry, I thought I was stepping into a life of love and security. Instead, I walked into a nightmare ruled by his mother, Susan. At first, it was just small things. Comments about how I cooked, cleaned, and spoke. Susan always found a way to make me feel small. And Jerry, my husband, my protector, did nothing. He just let her rule over us, just as she always had. Then, the torment escalated. The first slap came on a quiet evening. I had spent hours preparing dinner, hoping to please Susan and show her I was worthy of her son. But when she tasted it, she wrinkled her nose and spat it out. "This is disgusting," she hissed before slapping me across the face. The sting burned, but worse than that was Jerry's silence. He kept eating, unfazed. I cried into my pillow that night, wondering how love could turn so cold. Then the slaps turned into hard grips on my arm, yanking me into rooms, only to be scolded for the most minor mistakes. If I missed a speck of dust on the floor, Susan would knock over a vase and order me to clean it up, standing over me as I scrubbed the floor until my fingers bled. If dinner was not perfect, she would throw the plate at me, letting the food splatter across my clothes and the walls. The bruises on my arms and legs became a daily reality, marks of my failures in her eyes. And Jerry, oh, how I prayed he would stand up for me, but he never did. When I cried, he would tell me to stop being dramatic. When I winced from the pain, he would remind me that his mother had raised him and knew best. If Susan said I needed to be disciplined, then so be it. He was her puppet, and I was nothing. As the months passed, the punishments worsened. I wasn't allowed to eat at the table anymore. Instead, I had to wait until they were finished, and then eat whatever scraps remained. Some nights, there was nothing left. I would lie awake in bed, my stomach aching from hunger, my soul aching from despair. My body grew weaker, yet Susan still expected me to clean every inch of the house. She would dump a bucket of dirty water on the floor if I missed a spot, forcing me to start over again. My hands were raw, my knees bruised from kneeling, but I was never good enough. Then came the beatings. Jerry was no longer just a silent observer. He had become an enforcer. If I spoke out of turn and dared to defend myself, his fists would remind me of my place. One night, I made the mistake of flinching when he raised his hand. "Don't you dare pull away from me," he growled before grabbing my hair and dragging me across the room. I couldn't even scream. I knew it would only make things worse. I started to believe that this was my fate, that I would live and die in this house, never knowing freedom, never knowing love. Then, I found out I was pregnant. Something inside me shifted. I couldn't tell Jerry about my pregnancy. I couldn't let my child be born into this. I couldn't let this darkness consume me any longer. But how could I escape? I had no car, friends, family, or anyone to turn to except Jeff. Jeff was the kind clerk at the grocery store, the only place I was allowed to go. Every time I came in, he greeted me with a smile. "How are you today, Selena?" he would ask, his voice gentle, his eyes filled with concern. I would force a smile, pretending everything was fine. "I'm okay, thanks." But he wasn't fooled. He saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the weight I carried. And one day, as I reached into my purse to pay, he noticed the bruises on my arm. His expression darkened with sympathy, but he didn't push. "If you ever need help, just let me know," he said quietly, slipping my change and groceries. I held his gaze for a moment, my lips parting as if to speak, but I couldn't. Fear clutched my throat. Instead, I nodded and hurried out of the store. The next time I came in, he handed me a Bible. "God loves you," he said. "No matter what they've told you, you are loved." I took that Bible home, hiding it under my mattress like a secret treasure. And one night, after a ferocious beating, I opened it. I didn't know where to start, so I flipped through the pages, tears blurring the words. Then, I found Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit." I broke. I cried out to God on the floor of that cold, loveless house. "Jesus, help me. I can't do this anymore. I need you. And I felt something other than fear for the first time in years. I felt peace. From that moment on, something in me changed. Susan noticed. Jerry noticed. I wasn't broken anymore. I had faith, and they hated it. One day, Susan almost didn't let me go to the store, suspicious of my change. But she wanted a meal I could only make, so she let me leave. I knew this was my chance. At the store, I rushed to Jeff. "I'm ready," I whispered. Without hesitation, he led me to the back room, telling me to stay hidden until his shift ended. Hours later, he drove me to his friend Anna's house, a safe place where I could finally breathe, where I could finally plan my future. I stayed at Anna's for weeks, healing both physically and spiritually. She was a woman of faith, and every morning we prayed together. She reminded me that God had a plan for me, a future beyond the pain I had endured. With her help, I contacted a women's shelter and started rebuilding my life. I found a small apartment, got a job, and prepared for the arrival of my baby Jackson. The fear that once ruled me had been replaced by faith. I was no longer alone. I had God walking with me every step of the way. The day my baby boy Jackson was born, I held him in my arms and wept. He would never know the pain I had endured. He would grow up surrounded by love, knowing that he was fearfully and wonderfully made by a God who never abandoned us. Months passed, and I found strength I never knew I had. I started attending church regularly, surrounding myself with believers who lifted me up in prayer. I joined a women's support group where I met others who had endured similar pain. We shared our testimonies and reminded one another that God redeems even in the darkest situations. One day, I received a letter from Jerry. He begged me to return, saying he had changed and missed me, but I knew better. The chains of the past no longer had a hold on me. I prayed for him, but I did not look back. God had delivered me, and I would not return to Egypt once I had reached the promised land. I began writing my story, sharing my testimony with other women who felt trapped and hopeless. I wanted them to know that God is a rescuer, a redeemer, a loving father who hears the cries of his children. My pain had a purpose, and I was determined to use it for his glory. As I watched my son grow, I marveled at the life God had given us. We had laughter in our home. We had joy. We had peace. I was no longer that broken, frightened woman cowering under the weight of abuse. I was a daughter of the King, walking in his strength and purpose. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I do know this: I am free. God gave me the strength to endure, and now he's leading me into something new. My son will be raised in love, not fear, and for the first time in a long time, I have hope. So, no matter how broken or trapped you feel, there is always a way out. You are worthy of love, peace, and a new beginning. Trust in God's strength, take the first step, and watch how he leads you into freedom. You are not alone, there is hope, and your story is not over.